Hello and welcome to my channel. I've got another one on the quest log for you today. And what I want to talk about are different deck building tips, tricks, and traps that'll prevent you from doing the best that you can in not only your local armory scene, but also at pro tours, callings, battle hardens, wherever you want to go and play Flesh and Blood successfully. Now with the release of these new heroes coming up, I think if some people can get some of these principles right, if some of you can kind of latch on to some of these things, you could probably show up at a battle harden, a local armory, or whatever first event you play this new hero at and bring something truly special to the front. So I wanted to make this video because I've noticed an influx of new players at my local armory, and maybe you have too. Some of these guys are coming in and they're bringing some new creative and interesting builds for heroes that I haven't seen before. But what ends up happening is that even though it's creative, it's just not good. No offense to you guys. There are some players coming, both new and old, that are bringing deck lists to the front, but it's just copy pasted from the most recent calling or battle harden, which there's nothing wrong with that. The massive card pool that Flesh and Blood offers, I can't help but feel there's so much untapped potential for so many different heroes. And at this point, I think we have almost 30. Maybe after this next set comes out, there are over 30 legal classic constructed heroes with new cards coming out for them every single set in both the expansion slot, armory decks, and in the set itself. I refuse to believe that there isn't both a creative and good list there for every single hero. And so that's what I want to do. I want to give old and new players some really good deck building tips, tricks, and traps to help develop your deck building skills. So maybe you can bring something creative that no one else has seen before and is actually a solid deck, at least at the local armory level. So deck building tip number 1, identify your core. First thing you have to do in identifying your core is just read your hero ability. Come over here, I'm gonna use Syndra as the example for this right now. So when we click and look at Syndra, you have to read her hero ability. And I've noticed a lot of locals kind of getting confused with some things with this. So I'm gonna go ahead and read it to you, and then I'll show you what's happening. Whenever you hit a marked hero, create a fealty token. Once per turn instant, pay 3 resources, equip up to 2 Draconic daggers from your graveyard. This costs 1 less to activate for each Draconic chain link you control. So you really gotta read this hero ability, read this hero ability, read your hero ability. And then you gotta play with it, get the reps on it. And it's really helpful in the limited format to do that. Maybe you can go to your local armory and do it, or just play with some friends. I think it's super important to know and understand your hero ability. And in this case, here's why. When we come over here and look at the Kunai of Retribution, it says once per turn action, destroy this when the combat chain closes, attack, go again. Something I've noticed a lot of brand new players are doing is that they're attacking with their kunais and they do 2 draconic attacks, and then they think that they could just bring their kunai of retribution back, but it says when the combat chain closes, not the chain link, the chain. Which leads to players building decks that don't actually work, right? So they might go with the blue base, they go blue, attack with kunai, and then a 1 cost, and then they want to activate Syndra, but they can't because their kunais are not in the graveyard. Getting reps with this and really reading your hero ability will help mitigate this misconception. Another part of your core is your equipment. The equipment stay on the board the entire game, and they're the most useful thing here. You could go and read every single ninja thing, but for the sake of time, I'm just gonna use this deck list that utilizes the Mask of Momentum game plan. We see here, for this, you have, we just talked about the problem of how do you get the kunais into the graveyard. Well, the number one card for this deck list, which is Brody Spurlock's deck list from the Calling Memphis, is Flick Knives. If you have Flick Knives, after your first attack or during your first attack or whenever you want to, you can get that kunai into the graveyard even if it's on the chain link. So this is the first part of your core. Now after that, we have 2 other cards in here that supplement this core, which is the Mask of Momentum. So there's a fun little interaction here where Mask of Momentum says when an attack action card you control is a 3rd or higher chain link in a row, to hit, draw a card. Let's say you go with your first attack, your second attack, opponent doesn't block it, but then your 3rd attack that's threatening the Mask of Momentum hit, they block it, but you can flick, get a hit on the chain link, and then the 4th hit will still trigger Mask of Momentum. It keeps the Mask of Momentum alive. Keeps the momentum going, as some might say. And also in the same game plan, you have the Blood Splattered Vest here that says that whenever a dagger you control hits, you may gain a resource and put a stain counter on this, and if there are 3 or more stain counters on this, destroy it. The core card of the deck, aside from the hero herself and the daggers, is Flick Knives. And so the mask and the vest both play into this game plan wonderfully. Now the Dragon Scaler Flight Path is just a really good Snapdragon Scalers, and there's no reason not to run it because it can block 1. The identifying our core, as far as equipment is concerned, is the Flick Knight Mask and Blood Spatter Vest plan. As the next part of identifying our core, we're going to want to see what some of the cards that synergize with our hero ability could be. Syndra cares about Draconic Chain Links 3 or more. That's the goal of the hero text, is we want to get to 4 wide, maybe 3 wide, so that we could recall our kunais from the grave and keep our mask momentum trigger going. So here are some of the cards that can help with that, right? Within the Draconic, luckily there's a lot of Draconic cards in here that could really push us in that direction, like cards like Brand with Cinderclaw, very easy, 0 cost, 0 for 3, go again, next attack is Draconic. You could follow up with something like a Blaze Headlong, right? That's also a very good card that goes into the 2nd slot of the Chain Link. There are plenty of other cards that can fit into that 2nd slot or 3rd slot, like Hot on Their Heels, Fire Tenet Strike First. But see, the most important part is that we're caring about, let's say, commons and rares that help us move towards that game plan. Because while the Majestics are really awesome and we love Majestics like Blood Runs Deep, but that's not the core of the deck. That's kind of just enhancing the game plan, not carrying the game plan, at least for this deck list, right? So there's a lot of cards in here that are certainly 3 ofs that do a lot of the same things, like Display Loyalty as it goes into that 2nd or 3rd chain link. Burning Blade Dance goes into that 2nd or 3rd chain link. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, Jeremiah, how did you find this stuff? You see, this is a Calling Memphis. It was the first one. Obviously, you're just looking at the number 1 slot here. And that brings me to my, my first trick for you to go along with tip number 1. And that first trick is, especially if you don't know where to begin, is to look at the precons that LSS releases before the set even comes out. So let me show you here. This is kind of really interesting, I think, to just look at as a thought experiment at the very least, right? To help you learn how to deck build. Because LSS knows exactly what they're doing these heroes. So we can kind of ignore the equipment slots because they're not like the legendaries, the Majestics. These are just the regular Bliss stuff. But let's just look at the core cards to include in the deck. So if we kind of look at them from right to left, you can probably already see it now. Minus all the Majestics, Art of the Dragon Fire, Art of Dragon Fire, Blaze Headlong, Burning Blade Dance. You come over here and we have Burning Blade Dance. Now, obviously there are a couple of other cards in here, like Breaking Point's not in the set, so that's obviously not going to be there. Instead, they put Dust Runner Outlaw, and they don't have Brand of Cinderclaw in there, but they do have the same principles going for it, right? Where you have like the 0 cost starters, you have the fire, or you have like the 0 cost starters right here, you have the Fire Tenet Strike First. We can kind of look at all these different cards, and they're all functionally doing what we want it to do. And so you could just say, hey, look at this Precon. I can kind of see the game plan that they're going for, and then build out from there. Because like you see, they have the danger digits. What's the obvious upgrade for danger digits? It's Flick Knives. But anyway, we come through here and we just kind of see some of these cards, and minus the Majestics and maybe a couple of other maybe useless inclusions like Silver Talons, right? You kind of need to have these cards in the Blitz Precon, strictly because you don't have better options. Well, they're not trying to give you the most powerful and impactful deck. You don't have the Majestics, but over here we do have the Majestics. So effectively, minus out the blues, you get nearly identical decks. It's almost like Brody Spurlock or his team or whoever helped them made it just said, hey, why don't we just throw all the best Majestics in there that go towards this game plan and enhancing it from the Blitz Precon. And it did really good. Now this brings me to my tip number 2, which is develop your game plan. You need to have a game plan for your deck, something that you can always fall back to. It lets you call out your outs. It lets you, like if you're put on the back end, you say, okay, I'm thrown off my game. What can I do to get back to my game plan? And so for this particular list here, the game plan is fueled by the Flick Knives, the Blood Spattered Vest, and the Mask of Momentum. And you see the game plan is to draw a card off of Mask of Momentum and threaten more damage, utilizing Flick Knives to carry on that chain link. So rather than only threatening Mask once per turn, you are threatening Mask twice every single turn, which unless the person you're playing just says go ahead and draw, you're going to, well, force cards out of their hand. The most important part about this game plan is that all of the cards in your deck are cohesive towards this game plan, and we do see that here, right? Where we have the Brand of Cinder Claws, the starter, your Blaze Headlong is the second chain link, maybe even Burning Blade Dance, which the opponent will want to block this, because if they don't, then you just get a free damage and you get the free recall Syndra back, you get to use Flick Knives a second time. And there are just plenty of cards that just play to this game plan. Like even if you're able to carry on like to the fourth chain, let's say the third chain link, they block and it's a Mask Momentum trigger, and then you flick to keep it going. You can Lava Burst at the end for 5, forcing 2 cards out of your opponent's hand. So to stop you from drawing into that arsenal or whatever, every card in this deck is forcing cards out of their hand to stop you from drawing meaningful threats, which comes to the second part of this tip. Is that you kind of, like we kind of want every single card in here to work towards that game plan. If you've noticed, there aren't a whole lot of D-reacts, there are some, and I think more recent Syndra lists have removed some of these defense reactions. So we have like Shelter from the Storm, Wax On, and Loyalty Beyond the Grave. I figure that these are probably just inclusions to stop themselves from getting fatigued, or maybe into like Mirrors to stop the mass trigger off of, let's say, a Lava Burst or something. So for the most part, there are like the defense reactions have been completely removed. They just don't exist. And the reason for this is that when you draw off your mask trigger, you don't want to just draw a defense reaction and be stuck with an additional card in your hand you can't do anything with. You want to take that and use it to the fullest of your power, right? To be able to send it at your opponent and hit them. There are some there are some players that I've seen that will like running Razor Reflex as a one of, and I can understand and see why you would like that. The issue is, now you're forcing the blood splattered vest in order to use that Razor Reflex, or maybe you draw into it and you just arsenal it when maybe you really wish you would have drawn into another like 0 for 4 or a 0 for 5 or something like of that effect. You just want to, you want every card you draw into to threaten something so that your opponent is actually blocking you. You know, maybe you're not playing Syndra, but you kind of want to just think about what's the idea of your deck. So the principle here is hey, do I want more attack action cards, or am I trying to be a bit more blocky? We'll look at a blocky hero a little bit later on, but because this, the idea here is just this deck just wants to go fast, so you're just gonna throw everything in here that'll help you go fast. Things like Dragon Power, where suddenly now your opponent's looking at a 1 for 7 at the end of, let's say, 3 separate cards, and maybe you get the draw off this one. So it's effectively what does your deck want to do? What's your game plan? If your game plan is I want to go fast, then you're going to want to have cards in there that help you go fast. But a final point to include in this is that talking just briefly about the blocking situation here. So you see, if a card blocks 2, generally speaking, you don't want to block with it. It's effectively a card that you want to send. Think like Snatch, right? The one that's a 0 for 4 on hit draw. Because it blocks 2, you don't really want to block with it. You want to be attacking with it. And so let's suppose you drew into a hand of all 2 blocks instead of all 3 blocks, and you really need to keep your arsenal. Someone attacks you with a CNC. You're given 3 cards if all you have are 2 blocks in your hand. That's why the 3 block here is so important. It allows you to keep additional cards to threaten lethal sooner. So that's something to consider as you're building out your deck, and I'm not saying you have to be exactly the same as this, because obviously I think there's more optimized things now. It's just nice to think that, hey, you know, the card blocking 2 is much better than card blocking 3, so if you ever find yourself in a position having to decide between 2 good cards, that additional block means something. So don't forget to take a look into that. Now the final tip I want to give you is account for your cost curve. We're gonna go over here to the stats, and as you're building your deck, you're gonna come over here to averages, and I think this is a really useful tool to utilize as you're building your decks on February. The cost of this deck is 0.26. So if you wanna think of it, it's every 4th turn you'll need 1 resource, every 4th turn. The average pitch that you have is a 1.11, so there are very little, if any, blues in this deck at all, period, or even yellows and everything. So if the cost curve here is 0.26, what we notice is that this blood spattered vest is super useful for getting that 1 additional resource that you need, because the last thing you need is to be resource flooded or mana flooded or whatever. I think one of the coolest things about this deck is the Kunai Retribution is automatically the starter. So if you draw into a hand that doesn't have any go-agains or doesn't have any starters, you pick 1 card in your hand, it is a starter, because Kunai becomes that starter. So the 1 cost is negligible, right, in that case. But for the most part, when we look at the deck, There are very few things that cost 1. So let's say like Art Dragon Fire, it's a 1 for 7. Breaking Point, a 1 for 5 with an on hit. Then we have the Dragon Power, which is also a 1 for 7 as long as you can give it the Draconic. Effectively, most of these cards are 1 for 7s, or at least something that could fuel that engine, like creating the Fealty token here. Flick Knives gets you that. Just straight up gets you that. Because at any point, Flick Knives just says, on demand, give me resource. Now, Brody Spurlock in his finals kind of messed up with this. He Flick Knives, or not finals, it was in that controversial moment. It was the game leading up to the finals, was it? Yeah, he goes to Flick Knives, and he doesn't get the resource when he wished he should have, right? And that resource would have saved him the game there. I would have put the recording here if I had it. I gotta look for it after this. Maybe we do have the recording. Either way, this is super important. And if this Flick Knives gets prevented, then you stop the resource trigger from the Blood Spattered Vest. It really messes up and sours your game plan a bit, and you're probably forced to arsenal the Dragon Power like Brody Spurlock had to do in that game. However, but I think that's what's really important, is accounting for your cost curve. Syndra games rarely go past like 8 turns, so the fact that you're able to get max value out of your Blood Spattered Vest here is very important to the game plan. Recap, the tips I have for you for deck building is to identify your core. Read your hero ability. Really get to know it. Understand what cards are fundamental to your hero. And then the second tip is your game plan. Develop a cohesive game plan where the bulk of your deck works towards this goal. And the third tip is to account for your cost curve. You don't want to have too many blues in your deck to make your deck not powerful, but you also don't want to have not enough blues in your deck or enough resources to fuel the game plan. Now that I've finished up the recap for the different tips that I have for you, let's go to the next section, which I've already lightly touched on, which are different tricks. So like, a lot of you might be a little lost and say, well, where do I need to begin? And the first point I made was to look at the Precons. I think this is such a fundamental important point because you might find breadcrumbs from LSS, the people who developed the game. Obviously, they knew that Syndra was gonna develop into the way that she did, and that's why the Precon looked like the way that we said it did, right? As we were looking at it, say, hey, look at this Precon and everything. Yeah, that was them. The second trick I want to mention to you, and this one seems totally obvious, is just read the cards. Read the cards in the set. They can be super easy to skip past, but as we look at some of these generic cards here, right? You have Calming Breeze, Put in Context, Nip at the Heels, Trot Along. Like Trot Along right here is a card that just fits into so many different decks, and it's a blue block 3. It replaces so much. It's an amazing budget option. You could get rid of Warmonger's Diplomacy because this thing also brings value on its own. You might be able to make a good argument for Lay Low, Put in Context, Nip at the Heels, right? You can just reading these cards in the set that was released could help you think, maybe I do want to include these cards not just in my current hero, but in new heroes. Read cards that are in previous sets. I'm gonna kind of bring up a new deck list here. Look at this guy, Mulch. This is a common from Tales of Aria. This is the list we're looking at here is Hayden Jensen's Battle Hardened Portland top 8 finish. But Mulch here became better as new cards have come out. You see, when it first came out, there weren't that many good Earth options, aside from maybe Blue Autumn's Touch. But now, there are cards like Rootbound Carapace. Rootbound Carapace, you can fuse with this. Let's say, you pull Tunic Counter, blue, you attack with Mulch. It's now a 2-card 8 with the Tunic Counter, but then you can fuse it with your Rootbound Carapace that you put into your arsenal, and now you have a D-React in arsenal too. You have Felling of the Crown is an amazing Earth card. You see, rereading all of the cards from previous sets too can also help you in your deck building strategies. Hey, old cards that weren't as good can suddenly become better. And while we're here, may as well get to the third trick I had for you. So the first trick was to look at Precons, but the third trick is to look at the deck list the pros are using. What are they playing with? Now, this isn't for you to just go and copy whatever card or list that they're using. You could do that and you could do fine, but this is a deck building video. We look at their deck list to familiarize ourselves with new and interesting game plans, maybe seeing some strategies you didn't see before. Like I said, this gentleman here was including Mulch, and that really opens up the deck building opportunities for Jarl. and you think, oh wow, this actually works good. Like look at Redwood Hammer. I didn't even think of running Redwood Hammer. Now, instead of being focused on an ice game plan, maybe we can have a lot of our blues be earth cards. So now we have Redwood Hammer attacking for 4 all the time off of blue earth cards, which makes the earth synergy cards much better. Decompose becomes much better in him. I also want to point out the Barcelona's battle-hardened first place, Carlos Carrero. He has an amazing deck tech on this list, by the way, 100% worth going to and looking at. But the big combo piece we see here that opens up, like, mind-blowing, why didn't I think of this, right? Rampart of the Ram's Head. You pay 1 resource to give this +1 until end of turn, which means you have 2 floating off of a blue, to play a Count Your Blessings. Now, normally a lot of people are gonna groan and say, oh, I don't like Count Your Blessings, but this is actually a unique and interesting strategy to develop value over the time of the game. So looking at this professional's deck list, we could actually say, well, hold on a second. If Rampart is good with Count Your Blessings, what else is it good with? And if we look down on this list, there's Staunch Response. So now maybe it's worth running a blue and a bunch of 2-cost D-reacts, right? And this opens up a brand new deck building opportunity for Jarl, where you're always getting 1 value off of your blue when you pitch it. How much more value can you get off of it? So this is more of like an inspirational thing where you could say, well, you know, this guy made an amazing stride with this deck list. Why don't we try something new? Maybe shift out 5 or 6 cards, change up game plans based off metas. This seems really cool. Which brings me to my 4th trick. It's to know your meta. I mean, deck building for a calling is super easy. I mean, calling Memphis, we all knew that it was probably going to be Syndra aggro hero or some type of aggro hero like Viscerai, taking the top part. So you either play the best deck in format or you play a deck that can beat the best deck in format. And there you go. You just have to get really good at that deck, play well, and you'll make it to the top tables. However, your own personal meta, for whether it's for your Road to Nationals, your Pro Quest, or even your Armory, there's a lot of opportunity for interesting deck building here. For me personally, I got top 4 in my Road to Nationals, losing to Guy Cohen on Enigma. Shout out to you, brother, by the way. Really good player, solid guy all around, love the guy to death. I used Hayden Jensen's Battle Hardened Portland list. Now, I didn't use it exactly. I removed some cards. Let's see here. I didn't use quick dodge flexors because I didn't need that for my meta. There weren't any assassins. I did run the AB3, however, with Heart of Ice, Null Rune Boots, Null Rune Hood, because there's a prominent Kano in there. I also subtracted the Cadaverous Tillings, added some Oasises, and I adjusted a few different other numbers on cards after playtesting with this deck for a while. So I switched out like 8 different cards. And I showed up to the event knowing my meta, and I said, let me just build this deck that's gonna trash everybody. I was top seed with this deck. Literally spinal crushed everybody. It was so much fun. It was really cool walking in and saying, I had this really awesome and interesting deck that nobody predicted that I would be on, that is really good in this pocket of the meta. I think a lot of people get hung up on this idea that they have to take a deck list to their local armory that is good in a broad world sense at a calling, but you don't have to. You can take a deck list that's good for your specific meta and have a lot of fun with it and express a lot of creativity. Coming back to this original idea that I was saying, that I want players to not only be creative with their deck lists, but also be really good with them. And so like I can even look at this list and I have a lot of creative juices flowing on like, hey, what can I do with this new archetype? Count Your Blessings, y'all, with Rampart of the Ram's Head. Maybe subtract Count Your Blessings and add other cards. It's really exciting, and it kind of gives me that like Terra vibe, like if Terra was in CC. So it's really fun, a new way to interact with the hero. So I do just want to do this brief recap. Look at the precons. You'll find breadcrumbs. Read the cards in the current set and in previous sets to develop more efficient game plans. Look up tournament decks. This is number 3. Look up tournament decks from the pros. Gleam off their ideas. Improve them. Familiarize yourself with the game plan. And also know your local meta. There's no reason why you can't bring a creative and interesting deck that's also good for your local scene. Now we're at the final part of our video, where we're gonna talk about different kinds of traps you'll run into while deck building, how to identify them and to stop yourself from falling from them. So see, at the beginning of the video, we talked about wanting to be creative while also producing strong and powerful decks. And a lot of times when people think that something is strong, it's not actually that strong, which leads to them, although having a creative deck list, it doesn't produce results. The first trap I want to talk about is buying into a bad game plan. And I'm going to use the Jarl Armory deck here as a primary example for this. You see, when Jarl first came out and we were all playtesting and it was so cool, it was the first time that Ice had come back into the meta in over 2 years. And so we initiated with some of these original deck building things, right? We read the hero text here, right? Whenever you play an Ice card, create a Frostbite token in an opponent's exposed head, chest, arms, or leg zone. We look at the precon, or we also look at the weapon. We say, well, this weapon is obviously part of the core, same with Gauntlets of Boreal Domain, right? So the idea here is that we want to buff up our Mangle, add -1 counters to our opponent's armor, blow it up, and then just cripple them with Summit the Unforgiving. You'd play an ice buff like Icequake, then Summit the Unforgiving, and now they're facing down a 9 power, a 3-card 9 with several on hits. Oh no, they won't be able to do anything. And then we look at the precon, we look at, see what are they adding? Well, look, there's this cool card, Crumble to Eternity, put a -1 counter, but you're kind of getting the idea here, right? Exposed to the elements. The idea that it felt here was that Jarl was supposed to be a dominating Mangle dude that blew up opponents' equipment and added ice into those slots, preventing them from doing things on that turn. And on its face seems like really good, but is it? So I want to focus here on Summit the Unforgiving. When we look at it just on its face, it seems really fun, it seems really interesting, there's a lot to build around it. It's the first weapon with the heavy keyword, right? It's the first weapon that costs 6. It's a Winter's Wail for 6. So you think, oh, this is a 2-card 6 with an on-hit. You have to take a step back and realize this is a trap. While Summit the Unforgiving is really cool, and it probably has some interesting opportunities, first off, it's a polearm, so you can't pummel it. That's really unfortunate. It is an Earth Ice Guardian weapon, so it does benefit from Earth attack cards that cite Earth attacks or Ice attacks, however, and Guardian attacks. However, yes, it's a 2-card 6 with heavy conditions. So the first thing is, it's a 2-card 6, but it's 2 blues. You need 2 blues for this thing to go off. And then when it hits a hero, create a Frostbite. So now it needs to hit. But it also needs your opponent to have blocked with their equipment, or you to have blown up their equipment. So we're already seeing some heavy restrictions. And then this goes against some of the fundamentals of FAB here, guys. It says that if this only card is equipped in your weapon zone, if it's the only card equipped in your weapon zone, it gets +2, which means if the shield blows up, it gets +2. Now hold up a second. Why on earth would we ever want to sacrifice some of the best shields in the game just to produce a 2 blue card 6 with an on-hit every turn? Think about it. You are forced to block with your equipment early, which is kind of anti to the fundamentals of Flesh and Blood. So even like looking at this, like if you want to break with your Steel Braid Buckler right away so you can start producing 2 card 6s with on-hits, it's forcing you to use your equipment to get the on-hit, to make the weapon valuable. When you're so much better off, like let's look at the Stalagmite here. Stalagmite, when you defend with it, produces a Frostbite token under your opponent's control, and this is pivotal to turning, like let's say Arachne, right? If Arachne is attacking you and you just know that he's going to take up the mantle, turn it into a Bonds of Agony, you throw this Frostbite in front of it. Now you're forcing them to give you a card to do any attack reactions. This thing not just blocks 2, it potentially blocks 3 to 6, depending on what's coming down the pipeline behind it. This has incredible value at the correct timing. Summit says that you don't get value out of your weapon until you get rid of your shield. But you don't want to force yourself into a position of using your shield and getting rid of it. You just miss out on so much value here, and I'm probably beating the dead horse at this point, but Summit the Unforgiving is a trap, which brings me to my next thing, is that Ice, right? Although it is a disruptive game plan, the second trap in this list is thinking that it is the primary game plan. You see, I believe that Ice is a supplemental game plan to every hero, including Icelander. And people just thought, oh, you know, it's Channel Lake Frigid, it's the best card in the game, it disrupts people, it did so much crazy stuff in Icelander, which is true, it did. But Icelander had 2 cards going over her, Waning Moon and her hero ability. right? So she could play this on her opponent's turn and slow them down significantly while also utilizing Waning Moon plus Tunic to send an additional 3 damage at them on their turn, shutting them down. So I think that a lot of people were just so focused on how good Ice was, they didn't actually take a step back and say, well, how good is it really? And I think that was a trap, is saying that cards and game plans are better than they really are. Because let's think Arctic Incarceration, right? It says create 3 frostbites under your opponent's control. Okay, your opponent just has pass, or has 2 blues in their hand and swings out past it. Like, it didn't really do anything. Something you need to avoid when deck building is to not turn your supplemental game plan into a primary game plan. So don't buy into those bad game plans, identify what the strong thing is, and let everything else supplement it. Which brings us to my second trap, which is ignoring high value cards. Felling of the Crown is such a good card, an earth element in general, that it was overshadowed by the ice game plan in a lot of people's brains, right? Felling of the Crown is an amazing card. It is a 3 for 8 when it's turned on, and it's not that hard to turn on. You only need to decompose once, and then a second time for it to turn on. Felling the Crown is the one attacking, right? So just to do a little math here, you need 1 blue, and then it's a 3 for 8 damage, and then you rip a card from your opponent's hand. That's an 11, that's a 1 card 11, or sorry, 2 card 11. Very overrated, overvalued card that was underrated by a lot of people, and I think the Earth game plan has been a fantastic strategy for y'all. Now the third pitfall, or the third trap that you can run into, is forcing cards onto a new hero. Like Spinal Crush, for example, is a good one here. A lot of people might think, oh, Spinal Crush is amazing, it needs to go into Jarl because he's a Guardian, and Guardians are good. You don't necessarily need it. I think it is good, but you don't want to force it. So we look at the Barcelona's first place. He doesn't have it. I'm like, wait a second. He doesn't have Spinal Crush, and yet he got first at this Battle Hardened because he played to his game plan. His game plan was to use Mangle to blow up his opponent's equipment that are important, not because he wanted to throw ice in there, but because he wanted to disrupt them. So he was okay with taking a turn off, well, not to blow them up. Like, he was okay with taking a turn off to do Crumble to Eternity, put the -1 counter on so that he could block with Unforgiving, tutor the Mangle, so that he can then give it the Dominate. Where is it? With Gauntlets of Boreal, the name. So he didn't force Spinal Crush into his game plan, and he didn't need it to win his overall tournament strategy there, right? I think that there was a lot of really cool cards that he included instead, like being on Sledge plan with Counter Blessings. It's just 2 blues, you swing with Sledge, and now you have a Counter Blessings on your back with the 2 floating. And also there's this trick element to this where he's able to make people think he has Pummel and have to be scared of Pummel every time he says, well, here's 2 floating. He has the Command and Conquer, you know, with one floating and a Tunic counter in hand, and instead of getting hit with a Pummel, you're getting hit with the Counter Blessings. Really cool. And also to look at here, he only had 1 Blizzard in his list. This list over here had 3 Blizzards, but we don't have to force 3 Blizzards into the list, right? There are cards that you don't have to force into your list just because it's a good card. I think it's the same thing with Stamp Authority over here, right? There's only 1 card in the list. Some people are running 2 or 3. We don't have to force them. Which brings me to my final trap that you may run into while deck building, is that you have to have 3 of everything. I think that is the biggest trap in Flesh and Blood, that people think that because a card is good and they want to have a consistent game plan, they need 3 of. The problem I see here is that you're sacrificing utility in the name of consistency. And I don't think you always need consistency. Sometimes you do need that utility. Like in this Barcelona first list, he has the 3 Channel Mount Isons. It's a blue block 3 ice, right? But we look at the Portland list, right here, he has 1 Channel Mount Ison, 1 So Tomorrow, 1 Tome of Harvest. And I can tell you, as I played with this, I really enjoyed this element of the deck, because I didn't always need Channel Mount Ison. I rarely used it. It's come in handy once or twice to get me an uncontested win. However, it was really nice to have the 1 of Tome Harvest, so I didn't get plugged up with too many. But I was able to draw 3 cards because my hand didn't work, and I ended up drawing into an Oakenold with a Pulse and a blue, and was able to do the, you know, the Oakenold fused thing, which was so satisfying to pull off. So Tome of Harvest, the one of, could fix the card and fix the thing, get you in the Earth card in the grave. Same with So Tomorrow, go straight to banish, draw a card, fixes bad hand, have 2 floating. Seeds of Tomorrow, you don't want 3 of these, because if you draw 2 of them in your hand, you're in trouble. Which 3 of Everything is just simply a trap, because not every card do you want a 3 of Everything. Because like I said, with Seeds of Tomorrow, if you have a 3 of Seeds and you have 2 in your hand, you're in trouble. A good principle to go off of this is whether or not you want 3 of a card in your deck. You say, am I okay with drawing 2 of these in the same hand? And if the answer is no, you need to evaluate whether or not this is a 3 of. Like think Fruits of the Forest, I'm totally okay with having 3 of these in my hand, or even 2 of these in my hand. Frozen to Death, it's a blue block 3, okay with 2 of them in my hand. Same with Rootbound Carapace, I'm okay with having 2 of these in my hand. I can de-react, decompose, and arsenal the other one. I am not okay with having 2 Earth-Lore Surges in my hand. I am not okay with having 2 Seeds of Tomorrow. And that list just goes on there. So to recap, here are some of the traps you're gonna run into. It's buying into a bad game plan, ignoring high-value cards, forcing cards onto a new hero, and 3 Ofs of Everything. Stuck around this long? I think this is my longest video I've ever made. Well, if you found any of it helpful, please let me know in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. What are some deck building tips, tricks, and traps that you've fallen for or have utilized in order to make your deck list stronger? I'll see you on the next video.